This is Meet Sean, where we break down real life topics insurance, annuities, real estate, travel planning, and home ownership so you can make smarter moves. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.
So think about the weather stripping on your car door. You um you literally never think about it, right?
Right, nobody does.
Yeah, you just assume it's doing its job, making this perfect seal between you and the outside world until, you're driving down the highway in this massive driving thunderstorm and suddenly a freezing cold drop of water hits you right on the shoulder.
And then it's the only thing you can think about.
Exactly. So today's deep dive is, well, it's about the weather stripping on your house. Okay, let's unpack this. We're pulling from a really insightful guide from WSV Group. It's titled Most Roof Leaks Aren't Random, The Flashing Problem Nobody Sees. And our mission here is to take you on this step-by-step journey to figure out why water suddenly starts ruining your ceiling, and more importantly, how the architecture of your roof actually works to keep the sky out of your living room.
It is a great analogy, really, because when people notice a water stain on their ceiling, their immediate reaction is to just go outside, look up, and try to spot a missing shingle.
Oh, for sure. You look for the obvious hole.
Right. We naturally blame the big obvious armor of the house. But the reality of residential architecture is that those thin metal joints, specifically what we call step flashing and chimney flashing, those are actually your roof's primary defense system against water intrusion.
Wait, not the shingles.
No, I mean, the shingles handle the easy part. They just shed water down a slope using gravity. The flashing has to handle the really complex geometry where things intersect.
Right, because a chimney is just this massive brick box violently interrupting a nicely sloped roof.
Yeah,
You're asking water to suddenly hit a wall and change direction.
exactly. It's a structural vulnerability by design.
So before we can even talk about fixing the leak, how do you actually know this flashing system is failing? Like, if I'm trying to be proactive for once, what am I looking for when I walk around my house?
Oh, the first visual cue is usually rust or corrosion on the metal itself. Flashing is typically made of thin metals, like aluminum, copper, or galvanized steel. And over time, the protective coating on galvanized steel just wears down from the elements. So if you look up at your chimney from the ground, or maybe, from a second-story window, and you notice this orange or brown streaking on those metal bands hugging the brick.
That's bad news.
Yeah, that material is oxidizing. It's deteriorating. You also want to look for actual physical separation.
Like gaps.
Yes, visible gaps or cracks around any roof penetrations. So chimneys, skylights, plumbing vent pipes. In extreme cases, you might even spot loose flashing, where a piece of metal is literally peeling away from the brick.
Just flapping in the wind because the fasteners failed.
Exactly.
And I guess if you miss all those exterior signs, you're eventually going to get the interior signs. The classic, terrifying brown water stains spreading across the drywall in your living room.
Which is usually the moment of panic for a homeowner. And this is where we run into a concept that causes an immense amount of confusion, which is called leak tracing.
Okay, let me ask a question about that, because this has honestly always baffled me. If I'm sitting on my couch, right, and I see a water stain forming on the ceiling directly above my television.
You assume the hole is right there.
Right. I assume the hole in my roof is directly above the TV, like it's a straight vertical line from the sky to my floor.
That is the logical assumption, absolutely.
Right.
But it is rarely how water actually behaves inside a house.
Really?
Yeah, water follows the path of least resistance. So when it enters through a tiny gap in your chimney flashing, it doesn't just free fall through the air in your attic.
Okay, so what does it do?
It drops onto a wooden rafter or a truss. And because of surface tension, that water clings to the wood. It can actually slide down the underside of a sloped rafter for 10, 15, or even 20 feet.
Wait, 20 feet?
Yeah, before it hits a knot in the wood or a nail and finally gathers enough weight to drop onto the drywall of your ceiling.
Wait, it clings to the underside of the wood? Like when you overpour a cup of coffee and the liquid runs down the side of the mug and then clings to the bottom instead of dropping straight down onto the table?
That is the exact same physical mechanism.
Oh, wow.
The cohesion of the water molecules keeps them stuck together, and adhesion keeps them clinging to the grain of the wooden rafter. So you might have a homeowner climbing up into their attic, looking directly above the wet drywall, and finding absolutely nothing wrong with the roof decking right there.
Because the actual culprit could be a chimney flashing failure an entire room away.
Exactly.
That is wild. You're looking up at the ceiling, cursing the roof right above it, and the water is basically navigating a wooden maze through your attic.
It really reinforces why spotting those external signs, The rust, the peeling metal, is so much more effective than trying to guess based on an indoor drip. It is the only reliable way to diagnose the problem.
Okay, so let's say I find the rusted metal or the cracked seal around the chimney. How did it get there? I mean, I want to understand the actual mechanism of the damage. We tend to think of weather damage as a singular dramatic event, you know.
Like a tree falling.
Yeah, a hurricane rips a shingle off or a massive tree branch falls. But the WSV group guide suggests something much quieter is happening.
Oh, the environmental factors are relentless, and they work on a microscopic level over years. Let's just look at the daily grind of the elements. Heavy rain puts immense hydrostatic pressure on those seals.
Let's define that real quick. Hydrostatic pressure, you just mean the physical weight of the water pushing against the metal.
Correct. When you have a torrential downpour, water isn't just lightly tapping the roof. It is a heavy moving mass of liquid exerting physical force against the seams where the metal flashing meets the brick.
So it's just pushing and pushing.
Yes. And over time, that weight tests the boundaries of the sealant. Then you factor in hail.
Which I assume just dents everything.
It does. Hail doesn't just bruise asphalt shingles. It causes physical dents in the metal flashing. When you dent a thin piece of aluminum, you warp its shape.
Makes sense.
And even a fraction of a millimeter of warping compromises the tight seal it had against the chimney.
But the guide also brings up extreme temperatures. And here's where it gets really interesting, because I was trying to visualize how temperature actually breaks metal. Think about a paperclip.
Okay.
If you bend a paperclip back and forth over and over again, it gets hot, it weakens, and eventually it just snaps in half. Is the roof essentially doing that?
It is undergoing a process called thermal shock. And what's fascinating here is that the paperclip analogy is incredibly accurate for what's happening to the materials. Think about a dark asphalt roof in the middle of August.
Oh, it's boiling up there.
Right. The surface temperature can easily reach 150 degrees Fahrenheit in the afternoon sun. So the metal flashing and liquid sealants absorb that heat and expand. The metal actually grows in size. Then the sun goes down, a cool night front rolls in, and the temperature drops to 60 degrees. The metal rapidly contracts.
So the house is literally breathing, like expanding in the day, shrinking at night.
Every single day of its life.
Yeah.
And this quiet, daily shifting in temperature is what slowly destroys the elasticity of the roof sealants.
Because they can only stretch so many times.
Exactly. When roofing caulk or tar is first applied, it is like flexible rubber. It can handle the expansion and contraction. But years of thermal shock dry out the chemical compounds in that sealant. It becomes brittle like a hard plastic.
And metal expanding against hard plastic.
It forms microscopic cracks.
And once a crack forms, it's game over. The sealant isn't a seal anymore.
The defense system is completely compromised. The metal pulls away from the brick, the brittle sealant cracks open, and you have a gap.
Okay, so the sun bakes the sealant until it's brittle, and the expanding metal cracks it open. We have our gap. But for water to get inside, the weather has to actually exploit that gap.
Right.
Which brings us to a really fascinating part of the guide about the drainage trap. Because if the roof is sloped, shouldn't the water just rush past the tiny gap before it has a chance to get inside?
It should, yeah, if the drainage system is working perfectly. But poor drainage creates an entirely different set of physical forces on the roof.
Like what? What causes it?
Poor drainage is usually caused by clogged gutters, insufficient roof slope, or accumulated debris. Like imagine a thick pile of wet autumn leaves sitting in a roof valley right next to your chimney.
Oh yeah, I've seen that on my own roof.
When water cannot flow rapidly off the edge of the roof, it slows down and pools.
And if it pools, it backs up. You know, I think people view their homes as waterproof shields. We treat a roof like a submarine hull, like it's completely sealed from the outside.
But it's not.
Right. A roof is really more like a series of overlapping scales, right? It relies entirely on gravity pulling the water down and over the next scale.
That is the fundamental architecture of a sloped roof. Shingles and flashing are not waterproof. They are water shedding. They only work if the water is moving downward.
So if water pools and starts rising up, it defeats the entire design. It's like wearing a great pair of waterproof rain boots, but then you go and stand in a puddle so deep that the water just pours in over the top of the boot.
Exactly.
The boot didn't fail, you just submerged it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it leads us to a fascinating physical phenomenon called capillary action.
Capillary action?
Yes. When water pools against those overlapping scales, it doesn't just sit there waiting to overflow. Capillary action will actually draw the standing water upward against gravity into the tiny spaces between the roofing materials.
Wait, capillary action, you're saying the water is physically climbing up the roof? How does that work?
Cool. Think about when you spill a glass of water on the kitchen counter and you take a dry paper towel and just touch the very corner of it to the puddle. What happens?
The water immediately climbs up the dry paper towel.
Defying gravity. The liquid is drawn into the narrow spaces between the paper fibers. The exact same thing happens between two overlapping pieces of metal flashing or between a shingle and the underlayment.
Wow.
If there is a pool of standing water resting against a tiny gap, the water will be drawn upward and inward through those tight spaces.
It's like a silent invasion. So you could hire the most expensive professional roofer in the world to install perfect, bulletproof chimney flashing.
You could.
But if you let your gutters completely clog with pine needles and a lake of rainwater is forced to sit against that beautiful new flashing, capillary action is going to pull that lake right up under the metal.
The integrity of your flashing does not exist in a vacuum. It is entirely dependent on the health of the home's overall drainage system. Standing water always wins.
Wait, if pooling water is the ultimate enemy here and clogged gutters cause the pooling, does that mean a massive $10,000 roof failure could literally be prevented just by cleaning out my gutters?
In many cases, yes. Routine maintenance is the difference between a roof lasting 15 years and a roof lasting 30 years, which is why the WSV Group Guide outlines a very specific timeline for homeowners to follow.
So what does this all mean? Let's talk about that timeline. If I want to stop capillary action and thermal shock from ruining my living room ceiling, what am I actually doing and when am I doing it?
You should be doing targeted visual inspections at least twice a year, specifically in the spring and the fall.
Why those two seasons?
Those are the critical inflection points of extreme weather. Spring inspections are necessary to see what physical damage the harsh winter ice and snow caused. Did a heavy ice storm bend the flashing? Did the freezing temperatures crack the sealant?
Makes sense. And fall?
Fall inspections are to clear out the summer storm debris and prepare the roof's drainage system for the coming winter.
Okay, so on a Saturday morning in October, my weekend warrior checklist is fairly simple. Step 1. Look at the flashing around the chimneys and vents. Am I seeing rust, cracks, or peeling metal? Step 2. Clean the gutters and downspouts. Get the leaves out so water doesn't pool and climb back up the roof. Step 3. If I see dried out brittle sealant around the chimney, I reapply fresh roofing caulk to restore that flexible rubber seal.
Perfect. And there's a fourth step on that maintenance checklist that almost always surprises homeowners.
Oh, what's that?
You have to ensure your attic is well ventilated.
Wait, how does the air inside my attic have anything to do with water on top of my roof?
It goes back to temperature fluctuations, specifically in the dead of winter. If your attic isn't properly ventilated, the heat from your living space, your furnace, your hot showers, your oven, it all rises and warms the underside of the roof deck.
Okay, so the wood gets warm.
Right. Now imagine there's a thick layer of snow on top of your roof. The unnaturally warm roof deck melts the bottom layer of that snow, turning it into water. That water runs down the slope of the roof.
Just like it's supposed to.
But when it reaches the eaves, the edges of the roof that hang over the outside walls of your house, there is no warm attic underneath them. The eaves are freezing cold.
Oh, man. I see where this is going.
The water hits the freezing eaves and instantly turns back into ice. Over a few days, this creates a solid block of ice at the edge of your roof, known as an ice dam.
Right.
Now, the rest of the snow continues to melt, but the water can't drain off the roof because there's a literal wall of ice blocking it.
So it pools behind the ice dam, and we're back to standing water. The boots in the deep puddle.
Exactly. And capillary action takes over, drawing that pooled water backward under the shingles and straight through the flashing gaps. Proper attic ventilation allows cold outside air to circulate through the attic, keeping the roof deck freezing cold.
So if the roof deck is cold, the snow doesn't melt unnaturally and you never form an ice dam.
You've got it.
That is incredible. The warm air inside your house is creating the puddle on top of your house. It completely changes how you view the architecture of a home. Everything is connected.
Which is why the title of the source text is so profound. Most roof leaks aren't random. They are highly predictable failures of physics that occur when the home's interconnected systems are ignored.
Let's play out the worst case scenario, though. Say I listen to this deep dive, I grab my ladder on a Saturday, I go through the spring checklist, and I find a massive rusted out gap around my chimney.
Okay.
The metal is just completely deteriorated. I can see the wood underneath. It's time to actually fix it. Let's talk about the reality of professional repair versus the temptation of doing it yourself.
Well, this raises an important question because the DIY route is incredibly tempting for homeowners. The guide notes that a flashing repair kit or a bucket of roofing mastic might only cost you between $50 and $200 at a hardware store.
Which feels like a huge win compared to calling a contractor. I mean, if I'm handy and I'm not afraid of heights, why shouldn't I just buy the $50 bucket of tar and slather it all over the rusted gap? Out of sight, out of mind.
Because of the true hidden cost of a bad DIY repair. First, improper installation of flashing is one of the leading causes of leaks to begin with.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Getting the overlapping geometry right so that water sheds properly is a highly specialized skill. But more importantly, if you just slap a heavy coat of sealant over a rusted piece of metal and a gap, you are likely trapping existing moisture.
What do you mean trapping it?
If that flashing has been failing for months, water has already penetrated behind it. The wooden roof decking and the underlayment are wet. If you seal over the top of it with a thick layer of impermeable tar, that moisture can no longer evaporate out.
Oh, no.
You have permanently sealed water inside the wooden structure of your roof.
So I basically just built a greenhouse for wood rot.
Exactly. You are essentially hiding the rot. It might stop the drip in your living room for a year or two, but underneath that $50 patch job, the wood is being consumed by mold and structural decay.
That is the ultimate irony. You try to save a few $100 by avoiding a professional, and by trapping that moisture, you lead yourself directly into a massive demolition project. You'll be paying thousands of dollars for mold remediation and replacing rotted wooden rafters down the line.
Right. The benefits of hiring a professional go far beyond just nailing the metal on straight. A professional repair, which generally runs between $200 and $1,000 depending on the complexity, provides an accurate structural diagnosis.
They actually look at what's underneath.
Yes. A pro won't just caulk the gap. They will pull up the surrounding shingles, remove the rusted flashing, and physically inspect the wood decking underneath. If the wood is wet or rotted, they replace the wood first. They provide a long-term cure, not a superficial Band-Aid.
And I imagine there's a point where even a pro tells you a repair isn't going to cut it. The guide points out that you have to know when to throw in the towel and replace the roof entirely.
Yes. If a professional gets up there and finds extensive structural damage extending far beyond the chimney, or if the asphalt shingles have lost all their protective granules and are at the extreme end of their natural lifespan, a repair is a waste of money.
It's just delaying the inevitable.
Precisely. If you are battling repeated, persistent leaks in the same spot year after year, the fundamental architecture of the roof has failed. Slapping new flashing on a decaying roof is futile.
So we've really decoded the entire lifespan of this unseen problem. If you're looking up at your ceiling right now or preparing your home for the next season, you now know the mechanics of what's happening overhead. You know how to put on your detective hat and look for the oxidation, the rust, and the peeling metal.
And the invisible physics of leak tracing.
Right, where water travels 20 feet along a rafter before dropping.
And you understand the environmental enemies. How the daily thermal shock of the sun baking the metal and the cold night shrinking it causes the sealant to become brittle and crack.
You know the dangers of the drainage trap? How clogged gutters lead to standing water, and how capillary action allows that water to defy gravity and climb right back up under your shingles.
Which naturally leads to the importance of the biannual maintenance checklist, checking the flashing, cleaning the gutters, and ensuring the attic is ventilated to prevent those destructive ice dams.
And finally, you know why throwing a $50 bucket of tar over a complex geometric problem is a recipe for trapped moisture and structural rot, and when it's time to call a professional to diagnose the actual wood underneath.
It really is a comprehensive strategy to protect the most critical vulnerability of your home.
But I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to mull over. It's something not directly answered in the WSV Group Guide, but it's the natural conclusion of everything we've unpacked today. We've talked extensively about how extreme weather and daily temperature fluctuations are the primary forces destroying these thin metal strips and chemical sealants. Given that massive temperature swings, intense heat waves, and torrential, unprecedented rainstorms are becoming more frequent globally, how long will this current method of home building remain our best defense?
That's a great question.
As our climate shifts and weather becomes more aggressive, Will the very architecture of how we seal our homes, relying on a little bit of caulk and some thin aluminum, have to fundamentally evolve over the next couple of decades? It's something to think about the next time you're sitting in your living room listening to the rain pounding on the roof.
It definitely changes your perspective. It makes you realize that the weather stripping, whether it's on your car door or 30 feet up on your chimney, is fighting a much harder battle than we ever give it credit for.
It really is. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. Hopefully, you can step outside this weekend and look at your own chimneys and gutters with entirely fresh eyes. Until next time, keep learning.
That's it for today's Meet Sean. If this helped, follow the show and share this episode with one person who needs it. See you next time.